Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Brahim Aude. Ethnic Studies, 50 years on. So we have, for the discussion of this topic, we have Tai Tengan, Chair of the Department of Ethnic Studies, Daviana McGregor, Professor of Ethnic Studies and Director of Center for Oral History, and Noel Kent, Professor Emeritus. He just retired a semester ago. Without further ado, let's just give each of us some kind of background on our relationship to ethnic studies in a quick manner. We start with Tai, and then we go to Davy and Noel.
Mahalo Brahim, aloha kako. My name is Tai Kovika Tengan. I'm Associate Professor in Ethnic Studies and jointly appointed in Anthropology. Joined the department 2003. I was chair once before from 2013 to 2016, and again now in my second year, in my second round of chairing. And very happy to be a part of this discussion and look forward to what comes of it.
Davy?
Aloha kako, I'm Daviana Pomeka'i McGregor. I'm a professor in the Department of Ethnic Studies, and I'm the director for the Center of Oral History, which just transferred to the Department of Ethnic Studies about 2 years ago, and we have relaunched it, sharing a lot of the collection that we have in our archives of 800 interviews with women and men of Hawaii. I got involved with the program when it was threatened with being dismantled, and I was a student back in 1972, and we had a sit-in at Bachman Hall for 3 days, and we were able to succeed in extending the program and having it offered eventually in 1995 becoming a full department. And I've been with the program as a faculty member since 1974.
All right, and Noel, how long have you been, had you been with the department or with the program first? And then you retired last semester.
So I came on in 1972, about the time Daviana was going on too. And and I thought I was coming on for one semester, and I wound up coming on for 48 years. What a surprise. And it was a delightful career. I mean, I was really privileged to work with an ohana that was, really supportive and in every possible way, and people who had deep interests of social justice and the same sort of interest that I had in trying to make the world a better place and trying to make the university a really a center for learning and for human growth. So I've been privileged. What can I say? I was very fortunate to be with these wonderful people and have wonderful students for all these years. And I feel a deep affection for ethnic studies and gratitude for being able to do this.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you very much. So now, 50 years on, and you'd think everything is hunky-dory with ethnic studies, and then we have this COVID thing, and then the UH launching of the post-COVID environment for the UH. So I interviewed Jonathan Okamura, who is also Professor Emeritus. He retired at the same time with Noel. And so he will tell us about ethnic studies and about his works since he's retired, etc. And then we go from there.
One of the projects I've had since I retired is compiling a collection of my journal articles and book chapters. And the introduction is called A Tale of Two Pandemics. And the first is, of course, the global pandemic of COVID-19. The second is global racism. I had to add that section following the police killing of George Floyd. And this generated this global movement, anti-racism movement, the killing of George Floyd. And we've all witnessed these demonstrations, marches, protests across the world, and including in Hawaii. And all of this is going on the news every day, every evening. Systemic racism has become a buzzword, even though nobody bothers to ask Joe Fagan, the sociologist at the University of Texas, well, Joe, what did you mean by this term? Nobody seems to want to credit him with that concept. But the issue I'm raising is, while all of this is going on, we have our own university at Hawaii trying to shut down the one department that is directly concerned and has a history of being concerned about these problems of racism and discrimination, not just in Hawaii, but in the continent and other places. It's just unbelievable that the administration would say, well, ethnic studies, just like theater or dance, they don't have enough majors. We should just shut it down or stop, whatever the term was, that department, as though it was comparable to any other department at the university. And it's purely a fiscal decision based on the budget for the department, as opposed to, well, what has the department done to address these kinds of problems and issues? What can they do at present to address these issues and in the future? So it just demonstrates how absolutely blind to what's going on in the rest of the world that the university administration has been during this past summer.
All right. So the other one I want to play is from John Wittick, who's been a supporter of ethnic studies. And in fact, he taught like 3 courses in ethnic studies, social movements in Hawaii, as I remember. So we will play that, and then we can comment on both segments.
I see the young people today are getting really activated and made more aware of the systemic issues of racism and the economy that they need to be aware of. I think ethnic studies is one of the few programs at UH that allows students to investigate that and to get involved. We've already, we've had some help from students at Hawaii Workers Center going out, going to food distribution sites, handing out flyers on the issue of unemployment, which is a mess. The state of Hawaii is leaving tens of thousands of people up the lurch, and more layoffs are coming down, and UI unemployment was cut off in September from thousands. So that struggle, we need all the help we can. Ethnic studies has been there for the community and for progressive community organizations. And my hope and my vision is that it would continue to do that. I was honored, privileged to even teach a class, I think 3 times in ethnic studies on social movements. And I think social movements and what ethnic studies shares about them helps empower young people and community people that they can make change. There's so many other messages out in society that you can't do anything, you're only one person. But ethnic studies and those kinds of courses that are in your curriculum empower people, allow them to have pride in their own culture and background, and to take action as needed.
So any comments? We start with Daviana.
Yeah, I think we were shocked when the recommendation did come. We had prepared what we call a brown paper, instead of a white paper, to the provost and presented it to him and discussed it with him. And he was very, very favorably impressed with the work and the accomplishments of our department. And he said, oh, nothing's going to happen because we would have to be tone deaf if we were to let something happen to this department. And then, so we were shocked when we got the recommendation that they might stop out the major in ethnic studies. And so we got in touch with him when we had that discussion. And then he didn't seem to realize that that was being recommended, and he changed it immediately. But I think it revealed, that unless we're vigilant and always watchful that the university can take steps that will have tremendous impact on our department. And we have always taken that position in ethnic studies that because we had to create the department from the momentum of our communities, we had to get funding from the legislature when we needed positions because the administration neglected our department and its growth. So we've always had to be on our toes, watchful, and ready to be advocates of ourselves as we are training our students to be advocates for our communities.
Yeah, wonderful. Ty, you have been working heroically to fend off this attack, I would say. Davy played a major part as well in doing so, with meetings and writing statements and all of that. So any thoughts on that, Ty?
Sure. Yeah, as Daviana mentioned, we had previous meetings that gave us a bit of a false sense of security that was slightly shattered when the recommendations came out. And the specific recommendation was that we were asked to consider partnering with interdisciplinary studies on the BA, and if our numbers continue to drop, then an option would be to stop out our program, which was, again, a surprise. It led us to organize and to call on our supporters in the community and also across campus. And that was, one of the silver linings of that, thankfully, short episode. Because as Daviana said, the provost and the Manoa budget team did respond fairly quickly when we articulated, our position and rejection of that language. But having people like John Whittock come to our defense and to support, to write into the Board of Regents, many testimonies flooded into the Board of Regents supporting ethnic studies, and it was a nice kind of way of having our 50th anniversary present, seeing that support, even if it was prompted by us being back in the position of defense. But it has also helped us to think more intentionally about being proactive on campus in the community, and to seriously think what our role is in the university and in Hawaii in this post-pandemic world that we're going to be encountering. And as John Okamura and many others stated, I mean, it's critical that we have a department and a space such as ours that connects students to the community, that tackles racism head on, also in relation to those other forms of oppression on sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and to do so with compassion and in our place in Oceania, grounded in knowledges of our Kanaka Oiwi, Indigenous Hawaiians, as well as other broader Moana and Nui Akea, those of the Pacific and the lands that help to nurture us.
Yeah, and Noel, in terms of your run with ethnic studies, so to speak, 48 years, so you can speak to the qualitative aspects of having an ethnic studies at the department at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, and in fact in other places like high schools and so forth. So what are your kind of feelings and ideas about such things?
We're living in a very dangerous time at this point with rising white nationalism around the United States and nationalism in other countries. And we find minorities being really persecuted in ways, that even more savagely than they've been before. So all of this speaks to the value of ethnic studies and what we do, and the fact that we should be building and enhancing our program here. One of the aspects of this is that ethnic studies could be a central point for creating a new center for ethnic, for transcending ethnic and racial and religious divisions, not only in Hawaii, but throughout the United States and the globe. I mean, that's something I think that the East-West Center was created for, and had it as its original mission. Hawaii has a wonderful international reputation for ethnic and racial diversity, and to some extent for relations, even though that may be that's not always true. And that's part of what we can really base this center on. But I'm thinking of we have the East-West Center, we have the Spartan Matsunaga Institute, we have the Ethnic Studies Department as a centerpiece here. And we could begin building an institution which basically becomes a center for people around the world to learn about how to become multicultural practitioners, how to basically help their societies build levels of tolerance and interculturation that they've never had before. So I think Hawaii has a major role in the future in building a new way in which people look at the other and appreciate the cultural contributions of other people.
Yeah, because without stability and peace in society, you can have no economic development or peace or anything of the sort. So what I want to do now is like go to a segment by Kyle Kajihiro, who was a GA, graduate assistant at Ethnic Studies, and also he taught courses in Ethnic Studies. Kyle Kajihiro, and then we'll go to another segment, and then we'll discuss.
A number of factors. There's the kind of the colonial legacy of the university and its role in maintaining racial and ethnic hierarchies in Hawaii. But I think there's also the neoliberal turn of not just this university, but many institutions in our society, where they see everything as having to be something that becomes capital, that could be make money, as opposed to something that has a social, that produces social goods and social responsibilities. And one thing I think, where those two things come together, Hawaii is often touted as our diversity as being an asset, and yet they don't invest in that, right? If we really want to be the gathering place, the sort of Geneva of the Pacific, a place where we help to bridge the differences in cultures and civilizations, then you need to invest in those kinds of learning that create those critical thinking and the social skills in order to navigate that world. And Hawaii could be an asset for, we could produce value for that if the university were to invest in those kinds of technologies. I'll call it technologies because these social and analytical skills are technologies for navigating the social world that we live in.
Yeah, and this speaks to some of the things that Noel was talking about. Before we discuss any of this, I want to go to Ethan Caldwell's segment where he talks about, tells you something about the value of ethnic studies, as we are practicing it, as professors are practicing it, and even students are practicing it. So we go to that, and then we can discuss.
What we do, especially with the oceanic focus of ethnic studies, is to always constantly push beyond just thinking about the continent, but more so what's happening here, what's resonating throughout the ocean, and in many ways, what happens when we actually center the inquiry in indigenous locations, indigenous spaces such as Hawaii. What kind of enrichments can we garner from these sort of, what I almost don't want to say as established, paradigms, in other parts of the world? How do we use this, how do we use these perspectives to change the way we're thinking about these different paradigms, these different theories? And in more so, I think there's a richness that comes from being in a place such as Hawaii, and especially in the Ethnic Studies Department, where when you're thinking about how the classes combine, when you think about the kind of conversations we have, the level of engagement that we have, not only with the students, but also the community, I think that in many ways not only helps shape the research that we do, but also provides us with that unique perspective to speak on and speak about the various ills and also the intersections, where not only do they resonate from here to the continent and back, but also internally within the different groups that are here. The contemporary moment has made it that much more important in some ways for folks to recognize the impact of ethnic studies. And I think it's crucial not only to the understanding of ourselves, but also to how these various systems, both on the island, throughout the world, on the continents and more, how they interact, how they come together, how they don't, but even more so, what can be done to actually address it so that, we can really strive for the social justice that, people often represent but never follow through with.
Yeah, so this speaks to the value of ethnic studies beyond like numbers, so to speak. Although like the numbers that the Manoa budget team relied upon were erroneous numbers, as we told them, as we proved for them later on. So Ty, could you speak to the question, like Ethan is talking about, basically having a compass, so to speak, for like a Pacific kind of motion towards ethnic studies, like, as you put it, our future, our way. That's the slogan you came up with, actually. So could you say something about it?
Sure. I don't know if I came up with that, but it is meant to honor the original slogan and model of our department, our history, our way. And to then start moving it forward in as we, collectively agreed upon in oceanic directions with a conference that we did back in 2015 for our 45th anniversary. And that's the image here of the as it's now known, Star Compass, which our colleague Vince Diaz takes issue with the idea of a compass because sometimes it puts it in the wrong frame. But it's a tool, a mechanism for wayfinding that came to us specifically from Papamaupealug, from Satawal, in the state of Yap, Federated States of Micronesia, who Papamau was the master navigator who brought navigation back when the Hokulea voyaging canoe was being built and then first sailed back in 1976. And that has led to this real, I guess, resurgence in knowledge, traditional indigenous knowledge from the Pacific based in canoe travel, and has also been an important way for us to draw upon not only kind of the metaphors or symbols of the knowledge, but the actual knowledge relations that come from it. And here in particular, we're thinking about relations with Micronesians in Hawaii and other Pacific Islanders. And unfortunately, our Micronesian cousins have really suffered some of the worst discrimination in recent years. And it's through efforts such as working on creating new canoes with Papamau's son, that we engage students both in the material, the physical aspects of working on voyaging vessels, but also in the intellectual and social work of working between some of the divides, so that we have Native Hawaiian and Micronesian youth working together with all of our students from different backgrounds and the leaders in the community and their commitments to social justice that the canoe and that project is based in, which is, I think, an important orientation coming from our traditions that are not only about finding islands, but also finding new relationships and ways of creating better societies.
Yeah, Noel, any comments on like the Pacific outlook for ethnic studies and in terms of future endeavors?
Yeah, I think obviously the Pacific and Asia, and that was, of course, the dream of the East-West Center initially also, that, basically we can become, in many ways, a place where a lot of the contests and a lot of some of the ethnic and racial animosity that we see in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, where we can deal with that, where we can help people from various countries who are here to overcome a lot of the tensions and the animosities that they feel, and to take a much broader view of how different ethnicities and different people can relate in those countries. So I think we have a real peacemaking role here in Hawaii that we really haven't been embarking on too much. And I think the University of Hawaii Manoa and the Ethnic Studies Department can play a major role in that. But it's going to take some real conscious investment by the university in that sort of project.
Yeah. So that's like, they shouldn't be short-sighted as they have been.
We need to really
and, our pressure on them be sort of open. Yeah. So what I want to do now is go to a segment by Richard Rath that shows how ethnic studies has been innovative in multiple ways, including finding different media for racism, ethnicity, stereotyping, and all of that. And this deals with the medium of sound, and how you can teach about sound and use sound to teach about ethnic studies and this anti-discrimination, etc., etc. So we go and watch that, and we'll move forward from them.
One is on sound and paying attention to modalities other than vision to explore what it means, what inequality means, and what cultural difference and social difference and inequality all mean. There's a whole sonic dimension to that. And the other part, which I think is pretty crucial, is I bring my experience running the Digital Arts and Humanities Initiative for 7 years here. And I'm teaching a course and working with students on projects on doing ethnic studies in the digital realm. So, for example, students, faculty, and community members within a week of the university shutting down after spring break last year, we got together and put together a set of resources for students, by students. So we called it Our Resources, Our Way, and put together something like 300 different resources that were particularly valuable to students, many of which, for various reasons, the university or the state, they couldn't provide these because they would be unofficial things. So we were able to jump in. Students found this really useful because it filled an actual need. And also the students that worked on it learned how to do a chunk of activism, even though we were in these virtual classrooms and Zoom meetings, that actually had an effect in the world. And they saw that this isn't rocket science to put together a website. If you do work with a team, everybody does what they do well. You can organize it and get something together really quickly that makes a difference in the world. So that's the non-theoretical version of it. But what I'm bringing is this digital expertise, which I'm hoping we can understand both how the digital can affect social justice and discrimination, but also how discrimination and social injustices get replicated in the digital world if you don't take an ethnic studies approach. So I'm not just bringing the digital to ethnic studies, but ethnic studies to the digital too.
Yeah, so this is interesting. Shows like how we are expanding, our scope and so forth, not only in terms of spatial matters, but also in terms of technology like sound and all of that, to teach about that which we have been committed to since our inception in 1970. So, Ty, any Comments on this?
I was actually more interested in hearing Daviana comment on this, since so much of the sound and digital aspect intersects with what the Center for Oral History is doing. But I would just say that I think what Rich brings is really unique and important, and helps to engage multiple senses, and that is again part of an indigenous or oceanic way of knowing. That it's not just about the sight, but it's really all the, not only the five senses, but those other ways of sensing and knowing and thinking, and the digital realm being so important too, because that's our children and grandchildren are all digital natives. But the idea of organizing there, what does that mean? I'm glad that he kind of flagged that, because some of the basic skills in organizing and reasons for doing so still remain, even if those forms are different.
Yeah, I was coming to Daviana later on, because she had a bunch of projects on that. So to speak to us, and also, I attended the Kaho'olawe, it was yesterday, the Kaho'olawe 30th anniversary and so on. So anyway, could you comment on the digital world, sound, and all of that, and in terms of your projects at Center of Oral History, and also some of the things that we have been doing for the 50th anniversary, at least 2 or 3 activities so far, events that happen?
Yeah, so our Center for Oral History has 800 interviews with women and men, and our center now is adding to that collection. We have projects on the 1978 Constitutional Convention and interviewing the delegates to that convention, with Colin Moore and Gerald Cato being the interviewers. And we're also doing the Kaho'olawe Aloha Aina project, which behind me, my background is on Kaho'olawe. This is the Halimua there on the island on the eastern ridge. And to this side, you can see Lele. It's a fishing heiau that's been rededicated for the makahiki ceremonies. And I think the beauty of the program that we had last night is we had those kupuna now who were active in the 70s and got involved in this movement to stop the bombing, together with the new generation that are now coming in and taking responsibility for the island. So that intergenerational conversation and connecting between the first timers and now the new generation was so valuable and important. And the new generation was so appreciative of all the work that the first generation to the island in rescuing the island from being bombed for 50 years were involved in. So October 22, 1990 marked the 30th anniversary of having stopped the bombing, and we are acknowledging that, but also looking forward from there. What was the how did the island stop the bombing? And we looked at the balance between politics and religion as well. So in my classes, I have taken many students to Kaho'olawe to get involved and to experience the island. And it's been transformative for most of the students who've come through through my course to the island. And that experience is reflected in the role that a lot of our students have gone on to play in the stewardship of lands in Hawaii. And there are programs now initiated by the Edith Kanakaole Foundation to delve into our chants. And this is connecting to what Rich was talking about in sound. And because our Hawaiian language was oral for generations and centuries, once we had the capacity to write it down, there were many, many chants that were written and which we have access to in our Hawaiian newspaper collection, but also through interviews that were done by the Bishop Museum ethnographers. And these chants have within them what we call kanawai for a stewardship, proper stewardship of the islands. So we're delving into that record, that oral record that was, then committed to paper, and those chants represent observations of our ancestors about what was needed to keep our environment healthy. And this is another dimension I think that's important with taking an oceanic approach to ethnic studies, is that really for us to be effective on islands and sustainable on islands, and also sustain healthy relationships on islands, that we really need to take a biocultural approach to looking at society and to look at the interchange between and the interrelation between society and our ecology and our environment. And our ancestors understood that. And when we take an oceanic approach to that, then that's essential, is to take a biocultural approach to understanding our society and also preparing for climate change, as well as these kind of pandemics, which are also a symptom of this climate change and what the imbalance that capitalism has created in our society and with our world and universe.
Okay, great. Before I go to Noel, if I may, I want to show a segment from Amy Agbayani, who has been a very good supporter, important supporter for ethnic studies. And she talks about, minorities, Filipino communities and other minorities, immigrant communities, that is. And then I want to go to show what Assistant Professor Laurel May Singh from Ethnic Studies has been doing in terms of some of the stuff you're talking about in terms of climate change, environment, sustainability, and so forth. So we'll go with Amy, and then later on Laurel, and then we go to Noel to comment on those things and others before that.
Well, I think ethnic studies is faculty has done a good research, and they have the expertise about various communities in Hawaii. I'm particularly familiar with the Filipino community and also the immigrant community in Hawaii. And so the issues of, say, civil rights and discrimination to these communities and other people of color, the experience of immigrants having no access to government services or other programs because of they do not speak English and they are native speakers of their own languages, and they do not get treated equally by a lot of people because of this lack of English, standard English usage. These kinds of issues are the kinds of issues that I think are important to public policymakers and our community. And so that the fact that we have ethnic studies and our faculty there who can talk about these issues and also encourage their students to at least be aware of these complex issues is a real contribution to our community.
Yeah, so that's a good way of putting to see how ethnic studies has been doing in the community and doing research and important for public policy, etc. So I want to show a segment from Laurel May Singh's interview, because she talks about things that ethnic studies has been doing and the value of ethnic studies as it increases its scope and expands its work in terms of sustainability and so forth. We'll do that.
I remember at an early stage of my dissertation research, which is about the Waianae Coast of Oahu, I called the Ethnic Studies Department to try to get a hold of Marion Kelly, who's a giant in the type of work that I do, which is environmental justice issues, social justice, justice for Hawaiians. And yeah, I think I've always just really looked up to the faculty in the department. So I think right now in 2020, and I was able to start my position in ethnic studies in 2018. So I've been lucky enough to be at UH for 2 years. And I think right now in 2020, the work of ethnic studies is more important now than ever. We're going to be heading at some point, we don't know when, into a post-COVID future. So we want to build a just and sustainable world. You know, we're also dealing with climate change and planetary crisis, an economic crisis. And the work of ethnic studies is going to help us move through these many layered crises that we're facing. The work we teach and research about critical studies of society and inequality and economic inequality. This type of research and teaching is exactly what we need right now as we try to collectively recover and build new systems that have got us into this crisis in the first place.
Noel, here we have like these kinds of new avenues, not really new, but avenues that we have been developing over time, which is sustainability and environmental problems, etc., in terms of environmental racism, etc., etc. So could you speak to Amy's, Laurel's, and anything else you want to talk about that we have covered before?
Well, Laurel's talking about the post-COVID future, which unfortunately we're not into yet, but we will be. And if we go back to 1970, at the time that the program began, you have this, a lot of people were saying, well, why are you doing ethnic studies? That's passé. Ethnic groups are fading out. Ethnic consciousness is something from the past. And here we are in 2020, when we have the, this horrible pandemic, and we see that disproportionate numbers of Pacific Islanders, for instance, in Hawaii are suffering from COVID and dying. And we see a disproportionate percentages of Latinos and Black people on the continent are also dying. I mean, and we also see this specter of police brutality every place. So it's very real. I mean, we see that the upsurge of demands for indigenous rights, not only in Hawaii, but all over. And so we see that it's very real, and it's real. It's here, and like as Laurel says, and as Davy says, and Ty, we really have a chance to do something that is really important for the future of the world. And with the onrush of global warming, of the crisis, we cannot afford to have the kind of ethnic and racial antagonisms and anger and violence that we've been seeing in the world. So our role becomes extremely important. And we have a unique time here. We have a time when people feel their vulnerability, when people feel a connectedness to others who they haven't had before. So ethnic studies assumes a very vital role in terms of this post-COVID world.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, you look at what's happening in the United States, the most advanced countries, presumably in the entire world, in terms of ethnic relations and racial relations, etc. Before I go to Ty and Daviana, I want to show also a segment from Ola Hassager's interview that speaks to other dimensions of ethnic studies and how it serves the community and the university as well. So we'll do that, and then we can open it for discussion.
Ethnic studies has been the basis and support for creation and practicing a number of very large civic engagement programs that has become models for other developments in the field, and also is behind the leading role of the College of Social Sciences and Manor in certain fields in civic engagement. We have strong programs that are looking into social justice, ethnic relations, indigeneity, oceanic connections, and sustainability, and they are all linked to research and work coming out of the ethnic studies. Those programs have actually been the backbone of developments over the years. Transformative collaborations across both disciplines and the communities, locally and globally. Some examples I could mention is the Palolo Pipeline Program, that is an educational community building program taking its outset in the public housing area in Palolo, an urban community with a majority of Pacific Islander immigrant occupants. We have created a program that's now called the Malama Inaukwa program that is becoming one of the strong engagement forces in pushing for sustainability. It's a cultural and environmental program taking its outset in Native Hawaiian communities and indigenous practices. That is linking very strongly to STEM education as well. I don't think all the engagement work we are doing and that is important for our local communities could have happened without the support that I have been gaining from ethnic studies.
Yeah, like, you know, this dimension of civic engagement and service learning is rather crucial, and ethnic studies has played, you know, a pioneering role in this since its inception. And the value of that has been recognized. So rather than, you know, cuts or kind of leashing ethnic studies, so to speak, we should unleash ethnic studies, not only in terms of the community, university community, to make like a course in ethnic studies like mandatory for everyone, but also like to launch ethnic studies in a huge way in you know, schools, you know, public schools, etc. I mean, if like the public policy makers understand the value of ethnic peace, for instance, and economic development, etc., that it cannot happen without ethnic peace. So, Daviana, anything on that? And then we can go to Ty as well.
Well, I think that now that we're also in a period of the social distancing and what we have offered in the Center for Oral History is an opportunity for our students to do oral history interviews as service learning. And so we have, at our center, we've initiated a project on living in the time of COVID-19 experiences here in Hawaii. And we're interviewing people who want to share their experiences about getting through the pandemic. But also the state archivist has contacted the center and asked us to interview government officials to talk about how they have handled the COVID-19 experience. So I've interviewed Mayor Harry Kim and Jay Butai, who's the head of the State Department Transportation. We've my associate Micah Mizukami has interviewed Mr. Tatum when he resigned from the retired from Hawaii Tourism Authority. So we'll also have an important archive of material of the experiences of Hawaii's people living through this pandemic, from the government leaders to just, you know, some of my students are interviewing their moms, and, you know, one's a dietitian, another, you know, who has to take care of special needs children, and just documenting at all levels of society, how have we experienced this pandemic and what can we learn from this experience moving forward if we are preparing for expect another at some future date. So you know, we've had to adjust in that sense, but we're trying to have students also engage in looking at how can we restart the economy in a more effective way that is sustainable. And so realizing that in the 70s, our leaders made a pivot from agriculture to tourism when agriculture was phasing out and running away to the cheap labor markets of Asia and Central America. And they made a pivot to tourism and invested in infrastructure to support the development of tourism. And now that we've seen that tourism cannot sustain our economy during a pandemic or during economic recessions, we need to make that another pivot back to a more diversified economy. And so this is where the oral histories that we're doing again come into play, because what can we learn about how that pivot was made? What can we look to in terms of more productive productive use of our resources and creation of jobs that can be in conservation, for example. So there's been community organizations that I've also been in touch with and put my students in touch with, looking at the Kua'aina Uluwamo, which has networks of those who are providing stewardship for fish pond agriculture, aquaculture, as well as for stewardship of nearshore marine resources as community-based subsistence fishing areas, and getting our students to really look at these approaches that our communities themselves are taking to manage our resources more responsibly. How can we look at sustaining what is being called our Kama'aina economy to make sure we get through these stages and get away from a tourist economy that is controlled. 95% of Waikiki is owned by Japan. Most of the resources that go into tourism are not coming back into Hawaii. They're being funneled out to the transnational corporations that own the tourist hotels and jet service planes and restaurants and that are all owned by outside of Hawaii. So how can we focus in on our own economy to become more sustainable?
Yeah, that's what you get when you go into global capitalism, and we've been saying that for a long time, and then now they're opening up for tourism, so maybe the COVID numbers would start rising. I hope not. Ty, anything on that?
Sure. Just returning to your point about getting ethnic studies in the schools, and I think in large part building on those relationships that we have with the schools, such as Ula had mentioned with the Pololo pipeline, which is working from the elementary up through the middle to high school, both in Pololo and then up to Kaimuki High School. Those are really critical spaces for ethnic studies to be in, especially since some of the early conflicts around race and ethnicity are happening in the schools, and unfortunately, in our case, between, say, Hawaiians and Micronesians. And so getting them to engage in different ways with each other was one of the goals of the Kaholova'a program, the canoe building project, which also took place, has taken place in the Pololo housing. And other kinds of Aina-based programs, such as the work at the fish pond. And putting in that work together really helps to bring a sense of solidarity that crosses over those divisions and introduces them to these land-based economies that Daviana was talking about. And oftentimes those are the ways to engage students that are the most marginalized because perhaps of language, as Amy was speaking to, or other economic marginalization, again, because of the economy that we're in. So yes, to ethnic studies everywhere.
Wonderful. We have about 5 minutes, so I want to show that segment from Ethan Caldwell's interview to show that how we also are of service to our students in different ways, not only in terms of teaching, research, and mentoring, etc.
So I'm the faculty advisor for the Black Student Association at UH Manoa. It's a group that's centered around Blackness, meaning there are other group members that aren't necessarily Black by continental definitions, for example, but we use this as a space to not only foster and push beyond what the continental kind of definition around Blackness is, but also to really try to engage with what it means to be Black in a place such as Hawaii. And I think there's, different unique circumstances to being in this sort of diasporic space, but also in an indigenous space. And so using this particular student group, it's been, a great sort of way to not only engage with students, but also to challenge them to rethink what it means to have those sort of connections with Hawaiians, with other ethnic groups, and really form these sort of coalitions, not only on campus, but outside of campus in the community. And I think the other part of it that I think has been, so crucial is also to think of BSA as a space for Black students, Black faculty, Black staff to feel welcome. There aren't many of us necessarily on campus. And I think what BSA provides is a space for folks to connect and in many ways to build that sort of community in a place where there aren't necessarily as many Black folks around.
Yeah, I want to also show another segment from Laurel Mason's interview. She talks about service, community service, and all of that.
I'm currently on the board of Hawaii Peace and Justice. It's formerly the American Friends Service Committee Hawaii, and they've been around since the Vietnam War, assisting people in being able to find alternatives to joining the draft and fighting in Vietnam. And we're devoted today in 2020 to demilitarization, environmental justice, economic justice, and Hawaiian sovereignty. So right now we're working on a couple of really exciting campaigns. We're just coming out of a very vibrant Cancel RIMPAC campaign about urging the military and building awareness around canceling the Rim of the Pacific exercises that happen every 2 years in August. So they happen again in August amid the COVID pandemic. And I think it's just absolutely terrible that so many government resources were devoted to target practice in the oceans surrounding the islands of Hawaii instead of to building a necessary public health infrastructure to help the health, to serve and support the health of the people of Hawaii. Instead, they were saying they needed to just bomb the ocean in the name of national security. And in actuality, our security comes from education and healthcare, right? And housing, right? That's actually the true basis of security.
Yeah, so Noel, any comments on that?
Well, I think we've, looking back, I think ethnic studies has contributed an enormous amount to, over the last 50 years to our university and our islands, and, to really revitalizing, giving us a new sense of a different way to live. And what we need to do in this post-COVID age that will hopefully be coming soon is to basically be as creative as possible in formulating, the new ways that go beyond simply being a tourist economy, and new ways to really regenerate ourselves and to interact with each other, and to basically reconnect with each other.
Okay, we have to wrap it up. I'm sorry, but this is it. Mahalo nui loa. Thank you very much for doing that. It's raining in Haula. And aloha, and thank you for our viewers. Mahalo nui loa again. Aloha.